Hey guys, what's up? So this video is brought to you by Linode Hosting. If you guys are looking for reliable, fast web hosting, I've been using Linode for over 8 years. It's what I use for CodeHawk, for every website I've had for the last 8 years. So I've done business with them for a long time, but now they're sponsoring the channel, which is really cool because I can actually vouch for the product. Linode is growing fast. They have a new data center that they just opened in Toronto, and they're opening new data centers all the time. So make sure you guys check them out. There's a $20 discount in the link below. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to this new tutorial that I'm putting together. This is going to be for Unity. I'm going to show you everything on how to do like basic 2D game creation, from the art to the actual game development. So it's going to be rather simplistic. It's mainly just to get started in Unity, but I think it's much more in depth than any sort of tutorial that's out there. And it's going to put together, I think, the entire package so that you guys can take this and then hopefully be able to build your own 2D games mostly from scratch using your own resources. Should you be able to draw your own resources. Now, the only caveat is that the drawing tool that I use in this is Adobe Illustrator, and that's pretty much, it's a pretty heavily used tool in the industry for game development and otherwise, but you guys don't have to use that. Like the techniques are actually very similar if you guys use other painting techniques. Or tools like things like GIMP. There are free tools out there, so you don't have to use the Illustrator version, but that's going to be one small portion of this tutorial. Now, Unity itself is a free game engine that you can use, but you do have to set up an account, because if you do make a bunch of money with this, like more than $100,000 on your game, at that point you do have to pay Unity, or at this point they have like different pricing models. You're gonna have to look into that separately, but there is a free version, and that's what you should use for this, and that's what I'm using. Well, and yeah, use the pro if you want once you guys are good. But anyway, the free version is going to give you pretty much all the tools that you're going to need in order to build your game that can work on Mac, Windows, Linux, and then also be able to port it out to Android and iOS. So once you have an account set up with Unity, you can go ahead and download the installer so that you have the Unity editor, and that gives you this entire graphical user interface that you do. You use it to build most of your game, but really all your coding is still going to be done separately, and we're going to look at that in just a second. But this is Unity itself. It's the editor that we're going to pull up, and you can see the icon down on the bottom. And once you have that installed, just go ahead and have that up and running. Alright, so now what you're going to want to do is go to Google and type Visual Studio Code and get this installed on your computer, because this is going to allow you to write your code for Unity much easier. And we can even step through and debug our code, which I'm going to show you how to do using both our Unity editor and also Visual Studio Code. So if you go to the downloads page, you're going to get, or even the home page here, you get a download link for whatever operating system you're on. So make sure you just click on that, install it on your computer, and you'll be ready to proceed. Alright, so now that you have Visual Studio installed, let's go ahead and go back to our Unity editor, and here this is where we're going to go ahead and create our first game. So we're going to click on the new option, and then here we have two options. Since we're going to be doing a 2D game, we're obviously going to select 2D, but Unity itself was originally created for 3D, and then 2D was sort of an add-on to it. But one of the great things is that there are a lot of similarities between a 2D development and 3D development with Unity. So once you decide to, after this tutorial, like jump into 3D, that's something that you'll be able to, still be able to use a lot of what we cover in this tutorial probably to proceed and help you there. Alright, so now what we're going to do is go ahead and create a new project here. So we're just going to call this, we're going to call it like Wild West, okay, because it's going to be like a Western game or something like that. So like we're going to say create project. Now this is going to go, and I have a Unity folder on my C drive, like just my regular C drive on my computer, and then a project folder, and then like a Unity folder. So that's where I put like my games, but it doesn't matter where you put your game, but just keep track of that, because we're going to be working out of that for both Visual Studio Code and also with our drawing programs. Alright, so the next thing we need to do is we need to install the Unity Game Engine extension for Visual Studio Code, which allows us to actually debug our code. So if you really want to be like a true game developer, you have to be able to stop your code in mid-execution and be able to see and inspect variables and figure out what's going on. Otherwise, you're pissing in the wind, you're just guessing, and there's just no way. So this is why you need to have this, but you're just going to search Unity. When you click on this little square icon on the left-hand side, This is your extension menu. And you can see I have the debugger for Unity already installed, so I had the option of uninstalling it, but you should have a button to install it. So make sure you do that and then just reload Visual Studio Code. All right, so let's switch over back to our Unity editor, and this is our actual, where most of our game development is actually going to be done. And Unity provides this tool because it makes it so much easier when you're dealing with 3D assets, 2D textures, sprites, things like that. You can do basic animations with this software. But you can also write animations and other different types of software as well. So like in this tutorial series, I am going to show you briefly how I use an animate program that I can build cutscenes in using, that I can drag into Unity and stuff like that. So it's really a combination of the fact that you're going to have some sort of drawing software that you're going to write your textures and stuff like that in. If it's going to be a 3D game, you're going to have something for 3D animations and editing, which is like Blender or Maya or something like that. And then you also need some sort of animation if you are going to have like animated cutscenes. And for that, there's many tools out there that you can use, like Flash Professional or Adobe Animate. And then there's things like, you're going to see I use Animate Pro. It's like a $20 program that I paid for, and it's just very, very easy. It's not going to do like a lot of cutting edge stuff, but for what I'm trying to do, it's probably more than enough. All right, so let's just do a quick overview. I'm not going to sit there and waste a bunch of time on tutorials. There's so many tutorials on Unity and like how this is the file menu and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And you're just going to forget it as soon as I tell you, so it doesn't really matter. But one thing that you do need to keep in track of is that on the left-hand side here is your main. Like everything in your game is going to be inside here. Right now, there's just a camera. To play your game is this little play button at the top. You can also pause it and stuff like that. Just press the play button again to stop it. Right now I have 2 screens running, so I'm going to put this back in where it goes. So if you want to drag your tabs around, you can actually do that. Just drag the tab. You can tab things all over the place if you want. But it's a good idea to have both your scene and your game. I like to have those actually split off. In fact, I'll do it like that. So, and we can adjust all this stuff. But you can adjust all these different boxes here to give yourself ideal amounts of room. But the 2 most important screens are definitely, that will not get smaller. What are you doing? Anyway, the 2 most important screens are the scene view and the game view. The game view is going to give you the actual view, obviously, of what it looks like when your game's being played. And then your scene is just going to simply have all your different game objects in there. And you can toggle between the 2D and 3D version of Unity Editor. And that's what I was telling you. Like, it's a very similar flow. So you're going to see that even 2D game objects are represented in a 3D world. So you kind of get really accustomed to dealing with assets in both 2D and 3D mode. All right, so I deleted everything out of the game scene here. And what I want to do is I actually want to go ahead and say File, Save, Scene As. And your game is going to consist of a bunch of different scenes, but we're just going to call this Scene 1 to make it easy to remember which sequential order we're dealing with. And now that we have this scene 1, you're going to want to save constantly in Unity. One of the things about Unity is that it is the type of program that will crash on you and won't remember your changes. So just save all the time, unfortunately. All right, so first things first, every game needs to have a camera. So we're going to add in our camera system. So we're going to right click inside the left-hand menu item here, which is really our assets portion of our game. And then we just select camera. And then now that we've done that, we can now see on our game menu here that like we have the ability to see it. I want to tab this off to the right actually like this. This is better. All right. Normally it's best to have like 2 screens if you can have 2 screens when you're developing games, but a lot of us don't have that luxury obviously, but like this is great when you have 2 screens because you can drag your game off to one screen and your scene editor to the other, and that's usually the ideal way of doing it. That's the way most game developers do it. They have at least 2 screens, sometimes more. In fact, not just game developers, I would say most web developers these days have 2 to 3 screens, even analysts too. All right, so when we're dealing with a 2D game, there's different camera options that you have, and when you have whatever item you want to like edit selected, on the right-hand side here, you're going to have this inspector panel, and this inspector panel is going to give you all the details about that particular object, and you can add things to it, like add a component, you can add scripts, physics so that like it collides with stuff, but all kinds of different options there. Now, another thing too is when you're dealing with 2D games, a lot of times you're going to have the ability of using a perspective camera or an orthographic camera. Orthographic is going to be considered more like a square. It's like you're looking into like an old school like a movie, like basically one of those things that you just look in and like you're watching the movie play. It's like one of them old school things. That's kind of what orthographic kind of reminds me of. And then perspective has this much more like yeah, it's much more real world, right? It's the world around you, and the camera and everything changes as you move around. Now when you're dealing with 2D games and you want like a rather static background, you don't really need to deal with a perspective view. So for the most part, you can deal with an orthographic view for 2D game development. All right, so let's go ahead and add another object. We're going to create an empty object, and we're going to drag it outside of our camera. So we have this just empty game object. In fact, we'll rename it. I'm going to rename it to background. So you can give all your different game items different names to try to keep track of things easily. And now that we have this empty game object, I'm going to go ahead and put in a quad. A quad is a new feature of Unity, which is kind of the standard way of putting a background on like 2D orthographic games these days, where people used to use planes. There's definitely, when you're dealing with Unity, there's like, it can be frustrating because there's like a million ways to do the same thing. And there's hardly any documentation on like the best way of doing things, it seems like. In fact, the documentation on Unity as a whole is a complete clusterfuck, dude. Let's be honest. Like there is tutorials dating back from 2014 that Google is still giving like front and center, and like half the stuff is outdated. It's just terrible. Just follow along with this one, please. All right, so with this quad now, what I want to do is I'm going to go to my camera, make sure you have that selected, make sure you do have that the orthographic camera is there. We can adjust the field of view. Like if you highlight the mouse just to the right of these elements, you can actually click with your mouse and just scroll left and right, and it changes the value. So a lot of times when you're dealing with minute sets of values, that's the best way of toggling and seeing what the results are. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and jump into my drawing program. We're going to create a background image for our Wild West game. I'm going to use just a 960 by, yeah, there's just kind of like a normal width height perspective here. Now this is just going to be a rough drawing, so I'm not going to be like trying to do anything too great, but for starters, let's go ahead and add background here. We're going to fill this in. This is going to be our beautiful little sky and little country western game, so it's going to be kind of bright and happy. All right, so that's like my sky. Then I'll go ahead and have another layer that we're going to drag down here. Change the color of it. We're going to change it to brown. I'll put some effect on this thing, have it a little film grainy to make it a little dirty looking. Let's go ahead and add some other basic shapes in here. We'll add the circle and bring in a nice little sun. There we go. All right, so that's probably good just for a rough background image. So I'm going to go ahead and save. I'm going to save for the web, actually. I want to save this as a PNG image. But it could be a JPEG as well. So let's go ahead and put this where our game is going. And I was telling you before, I put my stuff in projects, Unity, and here's our Wild West. And everything should go probably in the assets folder. And we're going to create an art folder in here just for our custom art. And I'll put it here, and I'll just name this background. All right, so now that we have this little basic background image, I can go to the quad. And what I'm going to do is I need to import the art into my game, or really I don't have to do that because I saved it right into the art. I'm sorry, I saved it right in. Sometimes I save my art separately from the game and I have to import it in, but anyway, it's already here because we've saved it right there. So anyway, we're going to take the background and we're just going to drag it onto the quad. Now by doing so, it is then going to put the background nicely on the quad, so it looks pretty good. Like if we actually play the game, you can see that the sizing is all messed up and wrong and everything. But that's fine. That's what we're actually going to take the scale object. Make sure the background is selected. And then we're going to take the scale object. And we could just start scaling it. And the best way to do that is probably using these XY values so that we can match it up to the screen just like so. And let's go ahead and... well, our perspective's a little jacked. But, you know, that's part of the reason why you want to really keep in mind the math that you're dealing with when you're building games. If you're building a texture, then you want like 1024 by 1024. That way, when you know, the screen size is reduced in half, you don't lose a lot of resolution, or you don't lose any resolution actually, or get distorted resolution. But you can see my image isn't really going to work out that well. It's not something that's divisible, so you're going to have the messed up skewed aspect ratio a bit. And then here, like, this is where it also gets confusing too, because you can actually set the different game sizes that you want to deal with from the game menu. But like here where it says free aspect, you can actually start changing the aspect of the game. So a lot of games are designed this way. So if you're going to do like a 4x3, then this is like, you have all these different things. But one of the hard things about game development is that you design your resources in a way that can scale. So if you have texture-based resources and stuff that are 1024 by 1024, 64 by 64, whatever, they're divisible, then you change the resolution of the game, those textures still work. Again, because of our background image, not really the best for this, but you could still adjust and scale and stuff to make it fit for this particular, say that we're just targeting this game. So we're going to target this version, which is more mobile. Mobile version is going to look like this. Sun's way too big, whatever. But anyway, that is essentially how you do a background. But there's a lot of adjustment there. I did it in 2 minutes while explaining it. So if we take our time with it, it'll look better. All right, guys, now let's go ahead and look at how we add a like character controller, a basic 2D character controller to our game. And that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to create an empty 3D object. I'm just going to use a cube. I don't really care. So I'm going to drag this. I want the cube to be outside the background. And this is going to be our characters here. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this to character. And now that we've done that, what we want to do is we're not really going to need the box colliders, so go ahead and remove that. And we want to go ahead and add a component. Because this is going to be a character, an object that we're going to be able to move around in 2D and stuff like that, we need it to have a Rigidbody 2D attached to it. And let's go ahead and take a look at where this is. We need to situate the position as well, because currently it's off screen. So one of the hardest things for new developers to, or any sort of new person who's new to game development, the math and really just, putting yourself in the perspective of the game and like, so, in a 3D world with a camera, which way is that camera facing? What is the field of view? Meaning, what is your eyesight currently capturing, right? What is that camera capturing? And then how do you put shit in front of it so you can actually see it? Like that seems like it's so basic, but it's so difficult in game development to wrap your head around it initially. But I just want to focus in on, when you do get frustrated, make sure you save a lot, because you can easily blow away your project by like messing with layers and stuff like that within your scene until everything is all completely effed up and like you have no idea what's going on. So I've seen that happen to me personally, so I would say definitely save your work a lot. Probably save it under different scenes when you're doing a lot of experimental stuff after you've invested hours into a particular scene. And also just keep in mind, take things slow. Look at, it's always something very basic. It's like, well, why isn't my object showing up? Well, it's because it's behind something else, or it's not situated in front of the camera. What is the position of your camera? What is the scale of the object that it's trying to see? Which way is the camera facing? And then also, what is the actual position of these elements? So in this case, you can see that our character is not showing up. But the reason why is because the local position here. So if I want to go ahead and adjust the local position, I can move it further away here. You can see on the Z-axis, and I'm not seeing it. So let's go ahead and move it the other way. And just by little toggling here, you can usually start to make sense of things. Boom, there it shows up. So you can see roughly at about -9 on the Z index scale that our little polygon there now finally shows up, our cube. And that is our character. He looks pretty ugly right now. I do want to go ahead and scale him though, because I want to make him a little bit taller so he's more of like a stand-up kind of guy. There we go. Alright guys, so now I want to show you how to do pixelated graphics within Adobe Illustrator, and this could probably be similar with a lot of different drawing applications out there, but with something like Adobe Illustrator, I'll have the link in the description tab below if you guys want to sign up for Adobe CC. That's completely up to you, but this is like, it's more of a industry professional tool. I don't actually, I'm not saying you have to have it, but like it definitely makes a lot of things really easy, and I want to show you how to do pixel art with it. So I'm going to do just a simple 500. Yeah, we'll do 500 by 500 pixels. And there is a tool that we can use, which is the rectangular grid tool. And it's under the same section with the line segment tool and all this other stuff. But this rectangular grid tool, if we double click on it, we can actually set some values. And if you set it to the actual artboard size, which is 500 by 500 pixels, I already have this divided at 50 by 50. That gives roughly 10 pixel segments, you know, per square that you'll see. But you can adjust this accordingly. You're going to see that even though I'm doing like 10 pixel squares, you can still actually shrink that down to have smaller graphics if you want to. But let's go ahead and take a look at this. So I can go ahead and now click at the corner and I can drag it into my document. Now what I want to do is I want to get rid of, I want to lessen the stroke a little bit, but I do want to keep the stroke there. And then as far as the fill color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press K for my fill tool, which is, or the live paint tool in Illustrator. And if I just click on this, it creates all these little squares now as segments that I can now color in. So if I go ahead and select the fill color, you know, I can now start drawing an actual, like this is starting to look like kind of like maybe some sort of ghost or something. Like it's like the Mario ghost. He needs to have a tail on him. But anyway, you can see that that's how you do it. And then you start having some colors in here. And you start adding it. And like, well, you gotta change the color obviously. But that's how you do it. And you can actually draw your pixels that way and draw your entire scene. You saw that there's multiple ways of doing it, really. I mean, I have more of this like vector-based art that is in Illustrator. It's kind of more clean and simple, but it's great for backgrounds. But then, like, if you wanted to have like a pixel type of style, you could also do that here. So there's a few things here. Let's go ahead and we're gonna say. So the art that I'm actually going to use for this game is this this pixel art that I've already created. I used the same technique that I just showed you, and you can see that it even captures the squares. So when I told you that you can shrink it down, that's how you can do it. So you can see that art can actually look bigger and smaller, and Illustrator gives you that capability. So that's why it's it's a really cool tool. But let's go back to how you would actually do that. Just to finish up, when you're done with your art here, what you're going to do. So you need to right click and then say ungroup and then go to object, live paint. And then by saying expand, this is actually going to fill in the colors between the segments a lot better. But then what you want to do is grab the magic wand tool and you just select all this stuff. And then you can just, if you have it selected like this, you can just simply delete and it's going to leave your pixelated art. So you just have the pixels for your art. I mean, how badass is that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's pretty awesome. But that's how you can create pixel art. That's how people do it. If you guys are interested in using Illustrator, I just showed you how you could do it with that. But it is definitely, there's a price tag behind that. But there's a reason for it. It's one of the best tools out there. All right, so what I've done is I took my little cowboy pixelated art that I had showed you guys earlier, and I imported it into the game. You can import assets just by right-clicking and saying import new assets. So if you have art and whatever from all over your computer, that's how you would bring it into your actual game project. But then I can go ahead and just grab this guy and I can drag it. If I'm in my actual scene mode, I can go ahead and just drag it over top of the object that I want to place it on. And you can see there it is. So now I have this cowboy texture on top of the cube. Which, I mean, this isn't probably the best object type for a character, but this is just kind of a rough around the edges type of let's get started and get things done. So clearly you can see now our cube is upside down based on the actual texture. If I were to go ahead and grab the character, I can go ahead and just rotate its position. So if you want to rotate, make sure you just have the local rotation open, and then you can just you can rotate that way. Like, so you can see it's a cube, and it just puts the texture on each side of the cube. So it's really weird, right? But it is what it is. Actually looks really terrible, but 100% awful. Anyway, our cube needs work, right? All right, so when we go to play the game, you're going to notice that your little guy is just going to drop to the floor. Because he's a rigid body 2D, he actually adheres to graphics, so, or not graphics, gravity. So gravity is pulling down on him, and like he's just going to fall down, because that's normally what you want to do. If we don't want that to happen, I mean, you could change the actual rigid body 2D to something like kinematic or static, and he's not going to fall. But that's really not what we want to do in this case. What we want to do is be able to control this guy and put the gravity scale on this particular object to 0, meaning he does not like respect or react to gravity. But you still can't move him around. And I know the textures are terrible here, but this is just a cube with a texture on it. Like normally we'd have like a character and a UV wrapping, something like that, but that's way too advanced for what I want to do. All right, so let's look at how to make this cowboy move / cube. What we need to do is we have to actually create our first script, and we're going to be using C# in order to do this. On the properties panel on the right hand side, we're going to say add component, and we just say new script, and you have an option of naming it, and then there's a language type as well, C# or JavaScript. We're going to go with C#. That's the actual recommended, what most of the top game development companies that are using Unity are using. And we're just going to go ahead and give this a name, so we're just going to call this our character. So you can see now inside of our assets, we now have a character file that just got created for us. All right, so in order to actually make our character move, if we go to Visual Studio Code, we can now see that we have the character CS file that got created for us. Every game object in Unity has a start, which means that when the thing is instantiated / constructed, it's the constructor method essentially. It is what is happening in any sort of object-oriented constructor-based function, and that just means that like data can get passed in, but things are going to be done, like initial values will be set, and that should all be done like in the start, and that will be called one time every time the scene is loaded. So just one single time when that object is brought onto the scene, start is called one single time. Update though is called over and over and over again as fast as the game engine can possibly go. So that's how different objects on your game react to different things, because they're all in their own individual constant update cycle trying to react to certain events that they could be listening for and things like that, or that that they're listening for and sending off to other things that are listening. But that's how you ultimately tie all your game objects together and make things happen. All right, guys, so let's look at how to make the character move. What we're going to do is define a public variable on this object that we're going to call our speed, and it's going to be a float object, so we have to declare that in C#. So we have a float, it's a public, it's speed, so we're going to be able to set that from Unity. We're going to be able to see that in just a moment. Now what I want to do is have a private variable that we're going to call our Rigidbody 2D, and make sure you keep notice of the casing. And we're just going to call this rigid, okay? All right, so then on the start, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and initialize the rigid. We're going to say rigid equals get component. Also, if I want to have IntelliSense, what we're going to do is go over to our extensions, and we're going to download and install this mono behavior snippets, and it's going to give us actual IntelliSense because it's really annoying when I'm typing out and I don't actually see what's available to me. So let's go back over to our code here. And now we can say get component. You're probably going to have to restart your actual Visual Studio Code in order to be able to see the effects here. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and instantiate this. So what we're doing is we're saying when you originally start and you load for the first time, go ahead and instantiate this value here, this private value, to the game component itself so that we can get its position. And then there's also this, anytime you have a physics update, there's a separate update that we want to call, instead of update, which can be affected by load and all kinds of other stuff that game resources have, then you want to have like any sort of physics type of update. You don't want that to be held up by other materials and things that are not relevant. So we want that to be in the fixed update method. So any sort of physics type of updates, you want that in fixed update and not update. So those are two methods there. We can just keep the update method there because it's just an override and it's not doing anything, so it doesn't matter. But let's go ahead and define a few values here. We're going to say our horizontal position is a float, so we're going to say horizontal equals input.get axis, and then here we're going to say give me the horizontal horizontal axis. All right, and that and now we need to go ahead and do the same thing for our vertical position. So we're going to say float vertical equals input dot get axis, and then vertical. All right, so now we have those two positions. We can now say, let's go ahead and create a vector 2 position, which is how we can define our movement, because vector 2 allows the horizontal and vertical position. It can also come up with like a diagonal position as well. So that's what we're doing here. So we're saying create a new vector 2, and then we're going to say use the horizontal position that we just defined as well as the vertical in order to do so. All right, and then we also need to add force. So we're going to say take our rigid and go ahead and add force to it. And we're going to say take movement, which we just defined, and we're going to say times speed, which is the public value that we need to set. So now that we have this script and we press Control S to save it, we can go over to our Unity engine, and if we go to our character, we can now see that on the script it has this speed value. So if we set the speed, let's go ahead and just set it to 10, and if we press play, then you can see that we get no movement or anything yet. All right, and the reason for that is because I have a bug. That's not how you spell horizontal. So now if we go back to our game, press play, and we should now be able to move our character up and down. And because the way we do it, this is more of like kind of like a spaceship type control. It's definitely using its force, because we're saying add force. The actual force that we put behind it is continuing the object to move. So in a lot of cases you do want a character controller in that way, but you can also have it very Mario type specific. Mario does have a little bit of this. If you recall, like, I mean, if he has a lot of speed and he tries to stop, he does slide for a little bit. So that's what's going on with this game as well. We could also define the boundaries. We could see by putting in actual mesh colliders, but for right now we're not going to worry about that. All right guys, so the final thing I want to show you in this first series, this first video of this series, is that we can actually get our debugging working, and that's something I wanted to tell you about, and I want to address those extensions that we touched upon in this video. But you can go ahead and put a breakpoint here by just clicking to the left of the number, and that'll be a breakpoint. And then if I go over to my little debugger, like my little icon for the bug, and I say add configuration, and I press play, I have the option now of Unity Debugger because we installed the Unity Debugger, and I can do that, and I press play. You might have to do it, let's see, it should create, I'm in the wrong folder, son of a mother, I'm just kidding. All right, let's do that one more time. It has to be in the root folder for this to work. So make sure you're clicked off of the assets. This is it's buggy in that sense. Like you have to be like clicked off of, I was on the assets, I had this selected, so I didn't know what to do. But anyway, so if you have the root folder selected, it will create this launch.json file. And then now once you have that, we can go ahead and go to our character script. And if we go to our debugger, we're going to go ahead and say press play to launch it, or F5 to launch. And now you're going to see that we actually have the breakpoint being hit, and I can actually see on the left hand side that I can get all these different values that are in real time, and it's all in conjunction with the Unity editor. So like, let me go ahead and just stop this real quick, and I want to go to this and stop this, and I want to show you that you want to make sure that the Unity editor from Visual Studio Code is running. So your debugger is running first, right? So this is running, but you see that the breakpoint's not being hit. If we go to Unity Editor and then we run it from here, this is where then the breakpoint will be hit on Visual Studio Code. So they both have to be running in conjunction with one another in order for this to work. But this gives you the ability then to step through the code. So you can step through one line at a time on your updates and stuff, pause things in real time. There's no other way to build a real full-scale game without this sort of debugging support. All right, guys, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you vote up the video. And hopefully you guys like this and want the next video in the series to come out here shortly. So just let me know what you think. And hopefully you guys have a good day and good luck with your game creation. Take care. Bye.